Hello, I'm not into jazz, and this is Hollywood circa the late 30s. We start off with a musical number and Danny gallivanting around the town and inadvertently ruining this other cat's day.
Hollywood, where the streets are paved with gold.
The music isn't anything special, but the scenery chewing is great, especially this shot here. This shot is fantastic. It's also a decent thesis statement for the rest of the film to build on, about how Hollywood is so perfect and nothing goes wrong there, while the one singing it is explicitly causing things to go wrong. What comes next is probably the best scene in the whole movie. Narratively, it's nothing special. Danny meets with an agent who happens to employ the white cat from earlier, Sawyer, and they both get roped into a Noah's Ark picture. Why the scene is great, though, is the frantic, fast-talking style ripped straight from old-school films made during the time this was set in.
I'm a secretary, not an actress.
Come on, I'll give you Sundays off.
I never work Sundays.
Hey, double time.
Triple time.
Triple time.
Is there an echo in here?
You're pushing me?
No chow, no meow.
And that, along with some nice cartoony animation, makes this very enjoyable. The best part of it, though, is this shortcut of Sawyer opening drawers with her feet, climbing up them, and closing them while retaining her sarcastic, know-it-all mood that so concisely conveys a stunning amount of character in just seconds and without any audio needed whatsoever, showing that not all exemplary animation has to be big, flashy, and beautiful. Also, the writers knew.
You're soaking wet.
They knew. Next up is filming, and there's a very simple script for the animals.
Is that all? What? Where's the rest?
You're looking at it.
Oh, and on the way to the studio, we meet Pudge, who's around but has no bearing on anything really, but he's there. We're also introduced to Darla Dimple through Little Boat on the Sea.
And all of the people drown.
She seems delightful. Then, Danny demands that his part that's barely more than an extra, understandable for a first role in Hollywood, instead take center stage before the star and every other animal on the ark. Even that being the case, Darla takes it like an angel. That angel being Lucifer. And look at her face. These faces are exquisite, all contorted, making her seem like a goblin more than a person. You can just tell she's gonna be the baddie in this film. Darla calls in her butler, Max, who arrives breaking through the wall, is monstrously huge, and speaks without moving his teeth.
Yes, Miss Dimple.
But all of that is nothing compared to how he evaporates upon breaching the barrier of the studio again. This intro could not have been better. After this, we have Danny sulking that his obviously terrible decision didn't work out well. Even outside the prejudice, this would not have been tolerated. Regardless, he talks to the mascot of the production company for a while, Wooly. He tells Danny the other animals are disillusioned, not cynical.
So many broken dreams.
Danny decides to re-illusion them. Cue musical number the next, the Animal Jam Session.
I got rhythm in my feet. I got rhythm in my heart and soul.
Unfortunately, I feel no real emotion behind this, but the music itself is lively enough. Again, though, the best part about this is the animation. From the use of lighting to distinguish when someone's into it and when they're not, the superb character animation and exaggerated style, and literally the kitchen sink, there is a lot to love here visually. So, Darla doesn't like the animals and wants to set them up for failure. So she invites Danny to tea. There, she doesn't acknowledge her actions at the studio and pressures Danny into her own ideas.
You just get all your little friends ready, and I'll make sure LB sees your splashy debut.
And none of this raises red flags for our protagonist. Not the decapitated animal crackers, not the barely held together demeanor, nothing. It's funny, but at this point, Danny is portrayed as being too naive to even be believable anymore. Anyways, big and loud. About on par with the other numbers so far. Decent enough music, but the animators are putting in work. What sets this one apart from the other two are the two separate sections. One that seems removed from context, like Honest Advice.
They like it big, they like it loud.
And one that is not. Part 2 is such a great mix of untamed rage and malice with a bit of humor tossed in. It has a little bit of exposition separating the two parts so the audience isn't left in the dark about her schemes.
Is Albie's big press conference still Friday at 3?
Yes, it is, Miss Dimple.
Oh, thank you so much.
Which is a great way to introduce new context to her previous advice as well. Overall, it's just a whole lot of fun. Later at the studio, all the animals are there, then obvious bad things happen during that press conference. Max sells this one more than anyone else, playing a magnificent Igor to Darla's Dr. Frankenstein. The rest of it is just icing. It all culminates with the Ark getting washed down the streets of Hollywood along with some seriously pissed off executives.
You animals will never
Nibble kibble in this town again!
This leads to all the animals getting kicked out of Hollywood, and of course, Darla comes by to gloat. The animals all discuss their woes in a nearby diner, blaming Danny for the good intentions that he had and putting their faith in him.
You know, this is all Danny's fault.
You got it, brother.
This leads into a song from Sawyer, Tell Me Lies. And this song here is the strongest one so far. It's a slow jazz ballad, which really is not my kind of thing, and it has some lazy visuals of things that we've already seen, but there's one thing that does stand out here, and that is the emotion behind this. The lyrics are all about how Sawyer is smarter than falling for naive schemes like this, but she does so anyways because that is what she wants more than anything. While up until this point, she'd been the most vocal critic of Danny's optimism, at the time of his biggest failure, she realizes that she needs somebody like him to come through and break her cynicism. Because while she had given up on her own dream, her chance to be genuinely happy, Danny still hadn't, and it just presents a whole new side of the character so breathtakingly well. Danny's going home to Kokomo, but then he decides not to and instead perform a B&E to get invitations sent to the other animals for the premiere of Lil Archangel. Okay. At the premiere, Max finds Danny doing questionable things backstage, and jeez is this guy imposing. There's a brief conflict, and it all culminates on a giant Darla balloon, with a standard, largely self-inflicted bad guy defeat. But not before Max cements himself as the guy who steals yet another scene that he's a part of. And here I thought Danny was hungry for the spotlight. Back inside, Danny makes his last-ditch effort to show the world how talented animals can be. To which they all, aside from Sawyer and Tilly, respond with a rousing no.
Look, if you're willing to accept what they think of you, then you can go. I almost did.
Danny gives a short monologue about screw the prejudice, you like performing, so do it. And as someone who was and is still a performer, yeah, it's cliche, but it's true. Anyways, final musical number has a lot of energy behind it, but I don't care about anybody here except Danny and Sawyer, so giving the other solos is kinda pointless. Seriously, I've seen this movie several times in the last couple of weeks writing this script alone, and I remember that his name is Wooly, her name is Tilly, and that's it. Anyways, the performance goes well, Darla gets pissed and rejected, and Hollywood welcomes the animals back because apparently talent increases your worth as an individual. Well, I have got a good deal left to say about this one. Concerning the musical numbers, the choreography is stunning while the music is slightly less so. The actual dance is for sure the stronger part of the song and dance numbers, no doubt about it. And when it's got contributions from the likes of Gene Kelly, an actor and dancer who was gigantic in the exact same time period the film was based on, that is not surprising in the slightest. If you want to look at this as some kind of racial allegory, there is for sure room to do that, but it is far from a one-to-one translation. Animals are certainly seen as useful and typecast, but Darla seems to be the only one that's actively prejudiced against them. And that's not to say that passive discrimination isn't discrimination, but in an hour-long musical, you'd need to be a bit more overt to get that point across. She also seems to be concerned with appearing to be nice to them, which was not in the slightest the case for minorities in real life, and while the studio heads get angry after the flood, they readily accept them after being shown that the animals have talent, and if forgiving people who cause public damage simply because of their artistic merit isn't right up a studio executive's alleyway, I don't know what is. As far as characters go, Danny is slightly annoying, with his relentless optimism being his defining and only trait, and the secondary animals are all one note without much time to flourish outside of everything that happens in the film. Darla is devilishly fun, with most expressions being exaggerated to ridiculous extents, and Max is something all his own, being monstrous and absurd, doing all of what he does so deadpan, whether that be ripping valves off of hinges or driving a car smaller than he is. On the more serious side of things, Sawyer. Sawyer is the best character out of this movie, bar none. So much so that the entire movie would have been so much better if it focused solely on her, with Danny as a supporting character. We've seen so many optimistic underdog perseveres in the face of an unjust society movies, but how many jaded cynic reinvigorated by pure-hearted idealist movies have we seen? Still quite a few, but it's so seldom from the cynic's point of view. It's a great way to build the dynamic between the two while having us realize that Danny may be exactly what Sawyer needs before she does. And the best part of this is that nothing about the story needs changing whatsoever. It's just a shift in perspective. It would make the best character even better, the irritating one more inspirational, and shield us from the awkwardly executed scheme from Darla. We'd lose a little bit of time with her and her ludicrous shapeshifter phase, as well as the musical number that was the most fun the animators had in this film, so there are losses too, but I think that it would be worth it. Finally, for someone who talks about animated works, I don't use the word cartoon often. I think it works better pointing to something more like the Looney Tunes or Ed, Edd and Eddy, and less so something like Justice League or Daria. In the former, you can blow a duck's beak off of its face or eat a slide and you just go with it. In the latter, less so. It's kind of hard to gauge my exact standard, but in short, the genie is a cartoon character, Aladdin is not. For most of the movies I've covered, they're not really what I would call cartoons. Cats Don't Dance, however, the animation in it is absolutely ridiculous, both in its prowess as well as in its content. We have a tiny girl whose face contorts in impossible ways, a Frankenstein butler who evaporates into thin air, and a hippo who casually moves a whole building off its foundation, then back again. It is a true blue cartoon movie, and that's not something you ever really saw much on the big screen. Other animated movies have had their cartoony moments, but few of them embraced it to this kind of extent. Beyond anything else, though, this movie begs a single question for me. Can one aspect alone make a movie great? Because this is a pretty standard plot with pretty average writing and somewhat average characters surrounded by decent music. But my god, is this animation just phenomenal. It can do high energy, physics breaking antics, unhinged madness or rage, or just lots and lots of small and intimate character work. And it does all of this without biting off the very prominent Disney style that was running around everywhere at the time. The answer to that question is a resounding, well, I've certainly watched the movie more times than it was needed to write this script, so feel free to draw your own conclusions.
But I don't feel like dancing when the old went place. My heart could take a chance, but my 2 feet can't find a way. You think that I could muster up a little soft shoe gentle sway, but I don't feel like dancing.
Next time, we'll be dealing with a whole new kind of hero worship.